how can you overcome resistance? This could be in your life, in your profession, in creativity. What can you do to overcome resistance when it shows up? As the host of a podcast with over 300 episodes, I can tell you that I know one or two things about the resistance that we sometimes feel during creative processes, but also from writing a book. This is something that showed up a lot while I was writing, and maybe if you have experience with writing a blog or writing a book or a newsletter, you know the sort of resistance I'm talking about. So when do we feel resistance? We feel resistance when we go into deep work. We feel resistance to creativity. We feel resistance sometimes to doing physical exercise. And this comes from the fact that it demands an effort on the brain. And our brain is unfortunately wired for survival and not for thriving. This means that a lot of activities that really help us to feel fulfilled, like exercising or being creative, demand a bit more effort, and our brain think of them as optional. You don't have to start doing watercolors or writing a book. You don't have to exercise, and let's just keep all of this energy just in case. Of course, nowadays this doesn't quite work because before we were in nature more when we were hunter-gatherers, and we naturally would exercise as we were hunting, for instance. But nowadays, if we don't exercise, it leads to all sorts of problems, which we well know. So how can we overcome this resistance when we're faced with creative problems, with deep work that we need to do, with sitting down and writing that book? What do we do when resistance shows up? Before I dive into some of the strategies around coping, and we'll get there very shortly, before that, let's look at what are some of the signs that you're feeling resistance. And I'm sure some of these are going to sound very familiar. Some of the signs are being restless, doing a lot of different things, avoidance, aversion, not wanting to do it, maybe scrolling and suddenly asking yourself, how did you end up there? Procrastinating, doing something else, and all of these feelings of maybe daydreaming, all these feelings of aversion and avoidance. And they come in many different shapes, but roughly they all come down to you're avoiding it and you're trying not to think about the fact that you're avoiding it. So it's a sort of lying to yourself, not being fully honest around the fact that you're avoiding this and believing your own excuses. Some of the coping mechanisms we have when we feel this resistance is denying it. No, it's not that I don't want to write, it's just that right now I need to tidy the whole house instead. Or justifying it. And even when we don't believe our own excuses and people around us don't believe them either, it makes us feel better about ourselves. So in this case, the brain is both saving energy by not doing the most demanding tasks, but also it's feeling okay about it because we're avoiding the pain of saying the truth. Oh yeah, I will get into exercise, just not this week because I'm still recovering from a cold. So we believe these excuses, and some are valid, sometimes they are genuine reason, but I would challenge most people to really look at the reasons and excuses they give and ask themselves, is this 100% true, or am I just using this to get out of actually doing the activity, the creative project, the business, the physical exercise? There's a lot of resistance around these things because it does demand a lot of effort, mental effort, physical effort in the case of exercising, and the body naturally wants to avoid it, unless you're someone who's already used to it. When it comes to creativity though, I've found that even if I've written hundreds of blog articles and published a book and done, 300 episodes on the podcast, a lot of the time resistance shows up, a lot of the time. And I just expect it most of the time to show up because when we're about to do deep work and deep creative work, the brain is naturally wired to say, no thanks, it can wait. Can we just do all these fun little things instead? So what do we do? What do we do when we catch ourselves justifying, avoiding, distracting ourselves with something else? How do we overcome this resistance? There are a few core strategies that can help you every time this resistance comes up. The first and foremost is to pause, to stop. The worst thing you can do when you start to feel that resistance is to start to do something else entirely, because the chances are that this will take up all of your time, energy, and attention, and you'll never get round to writing the book, going out for the run. Whatever it is that you're resisting won't happen because you will get engulfed in another activity. To avoid this, we need to pause. So we need to recognize, first be aware, I am feeling resistance. I notice I am feeling resistance towards XYZ. This is extremely helpful. It sounds so basic, but it helps so much because you are then acknowledging there is a resistance. Instead of distracting and lying to yourself and justifying and saying you have other priorities right now, you're saying, no, this is actually my priority, but I'm feeling resistance. And that's okay, because we all do all of the time. So it's pretty natural. Okay. Then we accept it. It's okay. It's okay to feel resistance. It's not okay to constantly avoid these activities. That's different. That's what you do with the resistance. But it's perfectly fine to feel resistance. It's perfectly fine to feel any emotion. It's what you do about it that matters. And then one of the strategies that people have is to just force themselves to do it. People like David Goggins really into this discipline, and that is a way, that is a method, absolutely, and it can work. This sort of like, I'll just do it. That can work. But there's more subtle ways to reach the exact same results without just forcing from everything, giving everything you've got to overcome this resistance. Like I said, this absolutely does work, and depending on your personality, maybe that's what suits you best. What I've realized is there are more subtle ways, and you still will get to do the action. Once you have that awareness and acceptance, that's when you pause. And in that pause, the most important thing is not to do anything else. There are a few things you can do. You can brain dump. You can write down about your resistance. You can go for a walk. You can drink a nice cup of tea. All of these things are fine, because that's when you're dealing with the resistance. If you do something that is radically distracting you from it, whether it's scrolling the phone or starting a whole new project or checking your emails, then you're totally bypassing the resistance, and this builds a habit of ignoring the resistance, doing something else, ignoring the resistance and doing something else. So if you've really struggled to build an exercise routine, get a creative project going, build the business as a side hustle, and you find yourself constantly getting caught up in other things that aren't as important, this is because you've built the habit of avoiding the main task, the main activity, what you really want to be doing, and distracting yourself with something else. And you can catch this. You can absolutely catch this, notice it, have the awareness, and change that pattern. In this pause, feel the resistance. Feel your whole body, your whole mind saying, I don't want to do this, I want to do something else. Listen to all the excuses. Maybe we can do it later. Maybe it can wait. It's not that important right now. I have other things to deal with. As you give it its full attention, it will start to calm down. All emotions want to be heard and acknowledged, and it will calm down. This is a technique that has actually really helped me with exercising in the morning. I believe exercising in the morning is one of the best ways to start the day, and I pretty much feel resistance to it every day. I enjoy exercising, but the process of starting not long after I've woken up is always something I find challenging. Pretty much every single day. What's interesting is I first built a meditation routine. So the very first thing I do is meditate. And this, I no longer feel so much resistance. I literally get out of bed, move into the dining room, sit down and meditate. Put the app on, either do a silent meditation or guided meditation, and do this 15 minutes. The interesting part here is that during this time, it helps me process the resistance towards exercising. As I'm meditating, I hear in my mind, oh, maybe I can skip exercise today, maybe I can do it later, etc., etc. And as I hear all of these excuses, which I'm very familiar with, I just notice them. I just watch them. This is what you do in meditation. You just watch your thoughts. And then I also realized they're all just excuses. None of this is true. One of my favorite excuses is always when I'm really hungry, oh, I can't exercise right now, I'm too hungry. And I actually prefer to eat once I've exercised. And then, as I'm thinking this during meditation, I remember I've exercised loads of times while being hungry, and I survived, and I can eat afterwards. So I realize these are all just excuses. By the way, I am human. Yes, there are days I fall off track, I eat and I don't exercise. It happens. But most of the time, through this meditation process, I see all these excuses and I overcome the resistance. This is probably at least 90% of the time, because I realize it's simply not true. And the odd time where I fall off track, well, just like anyone, you're human and you get back on track the next day. So when you pause, observe this resistance. This is also something I did while I was writing the book. Every single day, the first thing I did, well, after my meditation exercise, went to my co-working space and then sat down to write the book. Before checking emails, before checking any communications, because that way madness lies, because then you just go down a totally different path. I would sit down to write my words for the day, and most mornings, not every single one, but I'd say 80% of the time or 90%, I didn't want to do it because it's an effort, it's deep work, it's challenging, it's the unknown, it's the fear of failure, it's all of these things. And I would sit with it, and sometimes I would stare at the screen for 10 minutes. And this sounds absurd, but actually during this process, the resistance melts away. And then you break it up into small steps, and you have different then techniques that you can put in place to break down the resistance. Let's first recap. So first, you are aware that there's resistance. Then accept it. It's absolutely fine to feel resistance. It's good. It shows you're human and you're about to do something worth doing. You pause. Do not do anything else or anything else that is a big distraction. Like I said, walking, great. Brain dumping, fine. Looking out the window, fine. But not emails, phone. All of this is how you build the habit of constantly avoiding the real activities. And that's how you indulge in the resistance instead of coping with it, which is a totally different way. Once you've paused, that's the moment I was talking about when I was writing the book, for instance, that's when you go to the next step, which is convince. In that moment, when you've paused, you start to convince yourself why it's worth doing and what you're going to do about it. Typically, in the example I gave previously, that would be when during meditation, I would tell myself, this is why you're going to exercise, this is how you're going to do it. Even if you just do 15 minutes, it's better than nothing, etc. I kind of give myself a prep talk to get myself to do it. And we all know the hardest is to begin. As you start, you can then do longer than 15 minutes or not. But it's the best way is to just get started. How do you convince yourself? Baby steps. The brain is so scared of tackling something so big. If you just say, hey, we're writing the book today, but one sentence would be great. Just one sentence. Just one paragraph. Let's just finish the page. Baby steps. If you say to your brain, let's write 10,000 words, unless you're feeling super geared up and excited, probably you will think, this is too hard, I'll do it tomorrow. We don't want to set the bar too high because that is when we are more likely to fall off track. We pause, we convince ourselves, baby steps, one thing at a time. And then we also look at the pain. What happens if you don't write or finish that book? What happens if you don't make progress on the projects that are really important for you? Then what? And allow yourself, this is kind of during that pause moment when you're convincing yourself, allow yourself to feel that pain. Allow yourself to think a month, 2 months, 6 months from now, when you haven't made progress on your project, how do you feel? And when you feel this pain, this is a fuel to get you started. And at the same time, you visualize again. Imagine your book is finished in 2 months, or imagine you've just done this great workout routine and now you're feeling top of the world, such a great way to start the day. We want to use those two main pillars of motivation, the pain and the gain, to our advantage. They don't just happen on their own. They happen because we engineer them. We think, what will happen when I don't do it? The pain. What will happen when I do it? This is so exciting. And we go back and forth, and depending on how you're wired, one of these might speak more to you than the other. Maybe you're more wired to be receptive to the pain visualization. Maybe you're more wired to be inspired by the gain visualization. Whichever it is, know what works best for you and use it. It's there. It's a free tool. It's called imagination, visualization, tapping into your own inner world and inner levers of motivation. Once you've started to convince yourself, doing the small steps, visualizing pain and gain, remembering the why do you want to do it in the first place? Why do you even want to write that book? Why is it important to exercise? This is great, but small note of caution sometimes, because sometimes if you're not quite as motivated as other days, asking the why will just demotivate you, because you'll think, oh yeah, that's why do I even want to do this? Never mind, I'm no longer interested in writing a book, and then you just give up. Sometimes asking yourself the why can actually be demotivating. Most of the time, really remembering the purpose can excite you and make you feel alive again. It depends. One of the things I've realized from working on this resistance, this is work in progress. This is daily work. This was work for me this morning. Went for a run. I felt the resistance. I heard the excuses. I thought I can run tomorrow. I've had all of this in my mind and I still went for a run. Being familiar with resistance also means you're not afraid of it anymore. You're not avoiding it anymore. You almost just smile. Oh yeah, here it is. The brain saying it can wait, or we can do it another day. I'm used to this. You become familiar with it. And what's really interesting is what I notice every single time when writing, for instance, is after about 15 minutes, 10-15 minutes of writing a few paragraphs, feeling it's going nowhere, I would then suddenly be in flow, almost from 1 second to the next. Within about 15 minutes, I started to notice and time it. Isn't it fascinating? All of this resistance and avoidance and anger and irritation and procrastinating for what? 10, 15 minutes where you're a bit uncomfortable, and then bam, you're on flow. And that's a wonderful feeling. If you're not familiar with flow, but I'm pretty sure you are, we're all familiar in flow with one way, shape or another. That's when time disappears. That's where you merge with the activity. That's when you forget about everything else. That's where sometimes you can spend 2 hours without moving from your chair because you're so absorbed in what you're doing. That's an amazing feeling. So it's worth persevering those 10, 15 minutes to get into this state of flow. And that's also when you produce your most productive work, if we're talking about the resistance in terms of work. This is so important. And when you're in flow, please don't check your emails, turn off your notifications, turn off the phone. All of these things break flow. So if you've managed to overcome those 10, 15 minutes and you're just getting in the flow and 20 minutes passed or 25 minutes passed, you see an email pop up. And you quickly go and answer the email. Then you have to do those whole 10 minutes of resistance again. This is why we talk about single tasking, not multitasking. It helps you to get into flow, but also if you start to multitask and go back and forth, you won't be in flow and you will constantly be breaking that flow and have to deal with resistance all over again. So no wonder it feels hard. No wonder it's difficult to overcome resistance, because most of us have built a habit of multitasking because of the quick dopamine effect, and it's just the way things work nowadays in our society. So when we're used to doing this all the time and used to the quick dopamine hits, the deep work feels even harder because it's less of a dopamine hit initially. But then as you get into flow, a lot of dopamine and a bunch of other hormones happening in the body, adrenaline in some doses, acetylcholine for the focus, probably a bunch of oxytocin and endorphins. All these things are happening because we are in flow. So it's worth overcoming that resistance, because then you make huge progress on your goals. You no longer feel that guilt and shame. And probably the most relevant and important thing to remember is that overcoming resistance is a habit. Every single day when resistance shows up, because it shows up multiple times a day, before a tough conversation, before a walk, before a creative project, before deep work in your work, every single time it shows up, you have a choice between indulging in the resistance. Let me just multitask and answer a million emails. Let me procrastinate the workout. Let me avoid that conversation, postpone it to tomorrow. Or overcoming the resistance. I see you, I hear you, this is tough, I can feel the pain, I can feel the resistance, I pause, and I start with baby steps. I visualize the pain and the gain. I begin. I don't multitask. I single task. If I really can't do it anymore, I get up from the chair, I walk around, I sit down, I try again, and then you get into flow. The more you practice overcoming the resistance and not indulging in it, the easier it becomes. The resistance is still there, but after a while, like I said, after 300 podcast episodes or writing a book or exercising daily, you're so used to the resistance, you're so used to the feelings, you just don't take them seriously anymore. You just don't take those thoughts seriously anymore. You're like, of course we'll write. Of course I'm going to go for a run. Yes, I feel the resistance because I do most of the time, but it doesn't take over because you haven't allowed yourself for it to take most of your brain power, most of your thinking process, most of your behavior. You just hear it and then it's gone, and then you do what you need to do. And you can feel it's uncomfortable, the same as the beginning of a workout, and then you know the rewards afterwards. That's the other thing. The more you're used to overcoming the resistance, you know what it's like to feel in flow and to get great rewards and progress. Whereas if you're used to indulging in it, then it can be really hard to shift, because then you've broken self-trust. You don't know if it's possible. You're not used to being in flow. You don't know if you can trust yourself to make that progress because you've always indulged in the resistance. And suddenly some major areas in your life aren't being addressed because they're constantly avoided or procrastinated or ignored. By the way, if that's your case, watching or listening to this, 100%, 2,000,000% fine, right? We are all at different stages, different progress. If you're used to always indulging the resistance, main thing is you notice it. And then it's baby steps. Each time you overcome it, you prove to yourself you can overcome it. And we can all overcome resistance every single day. And you're like, okay, I'll just overcome it like this. Well, I'll just do a baby step. Bring down the bar. If you've been aiming to work out and it's been 2 years and you've never been to the gym, start with a 5-minute yoga video. The lower the bar, the easier it is for you to respect it, and then you build the self-trust. And that makes it so much easier to overcome resistance in the long run. So I hope this has been useful for you. Please put in the comments what comes to your mind when you think of overcoming resistance and any question that you have. And if you would like any support or help on overcoming this resistance and making great progress on your goals, your dreams, your aspirations, I'm working with a handful of entrepreneurs and founders one-on-one to help them to break through, scale their business with ease and focus. So if that's you, check in the link in the description and we can talk further.